Hello everybody and welcome to another top 5 board gaming video. Today I've got a unique one where I'm going to be talking about standard hobby games. Before I really get started, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at all my various social media pages and my Patreon. On all of those you can interact with me and my channel in a whole bunch of really cool, fun, and unique ways. That said, today we're talking about the quote standard hobby games. What do I mean by that? Well, this is rather open to interpretation, and for me personally, what I meant with this particular list is games that you say, oh, well, hobby games, that's bumpa-dumpa-dumpa-dum. So these are ones that you'll see everywhere. They're ones that are essentially ubiquitous in the field. You'll see them in larger chain stores. You see them everywhere, and more often than not, these are the games that at least first-time gamers will tend to play more simply because they're a lot more widespread. That's effectively what I wanted to do, and rather uniquely, this isn't going to be a traditional top 5 in that I'm going ranking from 5 to 1. It's more of just, here's an amalgamation of the various ones that I've got. But I'm really curious what you guys have to say. I've done some videos along this vein where I have like the top 5 favorite starter games, games that are good for transitioning into hobby games, and you'll see some familiar faces on this one, but I'm really curious what you guys think. Like, when you think hobby games, what is the first thing that pops into your head? So with that, I'm going to get started with my number 5. At number 5, I've got Settlers of Catan. This is an older version of the game. I believe the original one came out in the mid-90s, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. Been around forever. Everybody who's anybody knows this, and anybody who plays hobby games is familiar and will probably have this game on a list similar to this. Again, you will see this in Target, you'll see it in Walmart potentially. I've seen this in Best Buy, Barnes & Noble, all sorts of different stores. It is literally everywhere, and a lot of the times when new people come in to start playing games, they would start with Settlers. The reason that this is so low on the list, though, again, I'm not particularly ranking these, but if you had to squeeze it out of me, essentially, I would say that I don't particularly like Settlers. I'm not a huge fan of it personally, and part of the reason is just because it's so ubiquitous. There's so many different types of it. I've just sort of gotten sick of it, but either way, when I think hobby games, I think Settlers of Catan, and essentially it's my number 5. Next up on my list here is Carcassonne. This is one that I really don't talk about very much, and again, similar to Settlers, it's one that I don't like too much. It's not something I particularly enjoy, but I like the fact that it gives you a lot of very classical mechanics that you see in a lot of different games. And again, this is the type of game that when somebody says hobby board games, or somebody says I'm interested in getting into board games, then a lot of times people would learn Carcassonne because it is very simple, it's really easy to pick up and play, and on top of that, it's relatively fun. It's certainly a shorter game, which is very helpful with a lot of it, but again, for me personally, I'm just not a huge fan of it. I have here the big box. I believe this is specifically big box 3, if I'm not mistaken, and one of the things that I find is a double-edged sword, similarly to Settlers of Catan, is the fact that there's so much Carcassonne. There's a lot of different things that you can get, tons of different expansions, but either way, reasonably good game, and definitely a fairly standard hobby game that you can find pretty much anywhere. Carcassonne, my number 4. At number 3, I've got Dominion. So Dominion, very classic example of the deck builder game, and again, one that is good for people just starting out on the hobby, one that pretty much anybody would notice, but for me personally, not the best as far as deck builders are concerned, and not my favorite deck builder by any means, but still, when I think of hobby games, I think, boom, Dominion, this is classic. And the thing is that it was only released, I believe, less than a decade ago, if I'm not mistaken. I know it got the Spiel des Jahres back in 2009. So it's not that old compared to some of these other ones, but at the same time, it introduced something that is now so ubiquitous with us that it's like, oh, okay, well, this is the OG, like, this is how you do it. But again, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of it. I like Dominion Intrigue more, and then I like the Legendary series from Upper Deck even more than that. So, you know, you can take it, you can leave it, but for me, it's definitely a sort of standard hobby game that is very ubiquitous, that you can find everywhere and anywhere. Dominion, my number 3. At number 2, I've got Ticket to Ride. I think this is the only game that's been on every single video style or video of this style that I've done. And the fact is that this is one of the few games on this list that I truly, really enjoy and really like to play. It's another one of these that's extremely simple. It's great for players who are unfamiliar with hobby gaming as a whole. It's great for people who just want to do something relatively quick, reasonably simple, and really fun. But at the same time, you still have a decent amount of competitiveness, but not so much that you're going to hate all of your friends afterwards. It just strikes that really beautiful balance that I love to see in a really good hobby game. And again, as far as, you know, when I think hobby games, what do I think about? I think Ticket to Ride, because this is something that I played initially that I really enjoyed, and now when I talk about them, I use Ticket to Ride all the time. People first coming in, I'm like, boom, play this. People want to get something a little bit more complex, boom, play this. Like, it works very, very well on a lot of different levels. Although, like pretty much everything else on this list, there is so much Ticket to Ride now, it's not even funny. But that all aside from the point, Ticket to Ride is my number 2. At number 1, I've got Pandemic, and honestly, this is the only one on the list that really would be at number 1 on any of these, and I think I've talked about this in several other similar contexts with like starter board games and stuff like that, simply because, again, this is a co-op game, and if people are coming from like Monopoly, Trivial Pursuit, Candyland, stuff like that, then they're not used to the idea of sitting at a table playing a board game that involves people working together. It's not something that's super duper common. And the fact is that many hobby games are cooperative, and this is the one that I reach for, that I think of when I say, oh, co-op hobby game, boom, Pandemic. You guys know, if you've seen my videos before, I really love the theme. I'm a scientist. It's all about science and stopping plagues and all that kind of thing. It does suffer from the ever-eternal plague of having too many expansions and all that kind of thing, but at the same time, I do really enjoy the game. I think it's really fun. Non-scientists and scientists alike enjoy it, generally for different reasons, which is one of the reasons that I like to have it, and I think that people of all walks of life really enjoy it. But either way, Pandemic overall, my number 1. Well, folks, that's it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my sort of top 5, but more just list of standard board games. So in other words, these are the games that I think of when people say hobby games or board games in general. These are the ones that tend to pop into my head first because they're just classic. They're the ones that came out first. They're the ones that I played first. They're the ones that are just held up constantly as examples of the specific mechanics that they represent, all of these kinds of things. But the fact is that I'm really curious what you guys have to say. If somebody says hobby board games or just board games in general, what do you think of first and why? What are the games that you think of? Like, for example, I could have thought of Cosmic Encounters simply because that's my favorite game of all time, but by the same token, that's not really one that I tend to think of when I think of hobby games initially, which seems kind of weird, right? But my brain is a little bit weird in that sense. But that, neither here nor there. Thank you guys so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, put any and all thoughts in the comments below. You guys know I love to hear from you. But with that, I will see you next time.